Hello, this is a video of the game I have built, or part built at the very least, called Flappy Ferg. Unfortunately I had quite a lot of trouble loading in my own assets that I built for this because they were either on different computers or didn't work with the Unity that I had, so I've had to use some of the assets. Anyway, so what I started with was obviously just loading in the assets as they are, and setting up the box colliders for each of the characters and the sky tiles and the ground tiles, and then so after having set them up, I went into the first script and set up the bird script. Now the bird script, where is it? So we had set up bird is dead. So initially when the game starts, is dead is false, which just means the game is running normally. But when is dead is true, the game will stop running, and the character can't click left trigger anymore. Left click. The next thing we did was to set the velocity of the character, so the up force of the character, vector 2, not there, sorry, but the up force of the character there is 200, which is just how high the character jumps. And then I had to set the animations for the characters. Now, through here I set all the individual animations for the characters to idle, flap and die. And so for idle, I realized that you had to take off has exit time, because has exit time means that it basically has exit time was relatable to flap, because as you only flap once and then after a second, I think it's the default set time, it would go back to idle. So we didn't want has exit time on idle, we wanted it on flap, and we did not want it on die, I believe. And so after having set the triggers for all these animations, I went to the UI and the game text, and I set that. So initially the game over text is set to off, because the game over text only comes up when the game ends, and we have that there. If game over text, if bird died, game over text set to true. So that's when the game over text shows up. Otherwise it just shows the score text during the game, just here, and then when it's done, game over and tap click to continue comes up. So after that we went into the game controller to set the actual controls for the game, if you will. And we've got the score text there, the game over text, so the scroll speed, and setting the scroll speed was for the parallax background. And I did this by duplicating this one screen here and adding it on just next to it, just moving it along the x-axis. The biggest problem I had with it was that I couldn't get a seamless transition. There was a slight few frames that would run, you could see it just about there as you got close to it, and changing the position of it didn't help, because as you got closer it would just mean that the scene after that would still have the same gap. So instead I just increased the x-axis size of the screen by a little bit, which just meant it covered that gap, which works surprisingly well. and it was an easy way of fixing that. Sorry, my phone was just going. One of the things I did learn about was a singleton pattern with the game over script, and a singleton pattern basically meant that the game control would notice if there's any other game controllers active, and so if the game started instance equals null, which means there is no other game controller, then this would be the game controller. Otherwise, if there is another, then it would destroy itself, which is really useful. It means that you just never have any more than one game controller running, and that was interesting to learn. So for the next part, the background scrolling. So we set the public float, because it's a speed. Set the public float, and it's something we want to change in game if it's not good enough. Set that to 3, and that's basically setting how quickly the screen moves behind you. And I actually liked it quite a bit faster than what it's set to, so I changed it quite a bit. So what we did with the scrolling background, we had to set a private rigid body to the ground, meaning that we could move that at a certain speed, which is what the scroll speed is for. But we had to make the instance of the rigid body to the ground, moving it on the x-axis. So for the next part was the column pool, which is the hardest thing that I've done so far. And after having added in the sprites, etc. for the columns and the layers, and the x and y position, I had to reflect and flip another column up above it and change the gap, and then set a small box collider in the middle of those two columns, so that whenever the player moved through it, it would mean they could win a point basically, and made a trigger collider for that gap, so that if a player went through it, it would set a trigger to give the player a point. And it was quite a simple script actually for the columns in the end, but for me it was something I hadn't done before. And the column pool, so we set the column minimum and the column maximum, and that was to set the y-axis of how high and low it was above the screen, and the x position deciding how far in front and behind it would spawn. The one thing I hadn't learned about was quaternion. Quaternion was setting the quaternion meant that we could use a rotation of the column prefab that I'd set, so you could just have it, just rotating, keep spawning again and again. And for the game control, that's for the Y position. Yeah, that's just about everything actually. But in the end, it all came together quite well. A few hiccups, but nothing more than could be handled. It's a shame I couldn't use my own assets for this, but I hope it works for you as it did for me. Cool, thank you.